You've probably seen these white houses before. This architectural style of Mykonos and Santorini has become a global symbol of luxury. They've become so iconic and sought after that copycats are now popping up all over the world, from Greek-themed villages in China to white and blue resorts in Colombia. If you ask any random person on the street why the houses on these islands are white, they'll confidently tell you the answer is obvious. So the people living there could stay cool over the hot Greek summers. While that is true, it's not the whole story. The whole story goes a lot deeper. Let's take a look at how tradition, deadly disease, and even fascism all set the stage for your white and blue Instagram feed.
Greece, now blue, then green. Now familiar, then exotic. Now classical, then modern. At your every footstep, changing face. Greece makes your heart beat.
Before we dive in, I just want to clear something up. I lived in the USA for the past decade, and every time I would tell someone I grew up in Greece, they would go, "Oh, Greece, cool. Are you from one of the islands?" I get it. The islands are iconic, but we don't all live on the islands. Only a minority actually does, and an even smaller portion lives in the Cyclades themselves. It's precisely in the Cyclades that you will find the white houses that even your grandma has heard of. They look timeless, almost inevitable. But the all-white look is much more recent than you would think. If we rewind the clock way back, pirates ravaged the Aegean Sea. So it would make zero sense to paint your town bright white and turn it into a shining target. Up until the 18th century, buildings in coastal regions were made from whatever materials were available locally. Stone, clay, timber where you could get it, and they tended to blend in with the landscape. So when did the white houses first appear? According to this article, we have drawings and travelers' accounts from the 1800s that talk about Aegean island settlements coated in plaster and, in many cases, whitewashed, but alongside other colors such as ochres, reds, and blues. White existed here and there, but not as a total uniform aesthetic. Today, if you go to Ia in Santorini, you'll notice that beneath the white there are still raw stone walls. If you hop over to Tsamis in the Dodecanese, you'll find adorable pastel yellows, reds, and neoclassical facades. In those early days, whitewash was mostly a cheap, practical finish that protected the masonry as it reflected sunlight and also helped keep interiors cool in the summer. But then, people started dying. It's the 1930s. Greece is barely a 100-year-old state. The northern regions, Macedonia and Thrace, only joined the country 20 years ago. Many Aegean islands, like the Dodecanese, will remain under Italian rule for at least 10 more years. Not even a decade has passed since the destruction of Smyrna in 1922 and the arrival of 1.3 million refugees who doubled the population of Greek cities overnight. In 1932, Greece defaults in the middle of the Great Depression. Infrastructure is minimal, poverty is widespread, and daily life looks nothing like the Greece you imagine today. It's common to see horse-drawn carts crowding the streets, with public fountains built for animals as much as for people. Running water and sewage systems are rare outside major city centers. The concept of general hygiene is in its infancy. We forget how good we've got it today, but in the late 19th and early 20th century, words like typhus, tuberculosis, and cholera struck fear in the hearts of everyday people. Check out this letter we found, written by the Chief Scout Commissioner in Corfu in 1916. He mentions that cholera has struck the island, and he praises the local Boy Scouts for their brave efforts to inoculate the public. Outbreaks were frequent, and public health authorities were improvising. But Boy Scouts just weren't enough. Enter lime washing. If you mix slaked lime and water, you end up with a magic white slime, which, when freshly applied, can kill most bacteria and pathogens on contact. It was cheap, easy to produce locally, and could be slapped onto anything. So people started coating surfaces with it to prevent disease. And not just the walls of their homes, but courtyards, pavements, steps, even tree trunks. It made the houses safe. It also made them white. If you've ever walked those tiny Cycladic streets and found yourself wishing you lived there, well, imagine them without plumbing and with a cholera case in the house next door. What we see today as charming architecture began as a chemical defense against death. By the mid-1930s, we already had lime in our arsenal, but we needed something to make it official. I wonder what or who... That's right, it's the 1930s and fascism is back on the menu, boys! While public health regulations in Greece were already promoting systematic cleaning and disinfection using lime, it wasn't until 1938 when dictator Ioannis Metaxas issued an official decree that wrote lime washing into law. And my team has actually found that very decree. Decree me. Take a look at this official government gazette from 1938. Every time the Greek government issued new guidelines for the public, they had to publish it in a document like this one. This specific one outlines new hygiene measures covering every type of building from meatpacking facilities to hair salons. It clearly states, walls must be painted white until 1.5 meters high, and floors must be disinfected every Saturday via lime washing. There you go. Lime washing written into law. And even though the houses on the Cyclades are not mentioned directly, the decree makes itself pretty clear. If you care about your community, you whitewash your walls. By the way, the decree also asks business owners to put up signs telling their patrons to wash their hands. It literally says, wash your hands, cleanliness is health. That's the level we were at. This is basically Greece outlining its hygiene laws for the first time ever. Ioannis Metaxas ruled Greece from 1936 until 1941. He's still remembered today as the one who said the big no to the invading Axis powers. Ironically enough, he was also openly inspired by the authoritarian regimes of his time. Metaxas wanted to cultivate a similar ethos of nationalism and uniformity. The regime promoted folk traditions and authentic rural life. He even had stylized uniforms for youth organizations. In other words, he was extremely fond of visual uniformity, how people dressed, how public spaces looked, and what buildings looked like. Imagine Metaxas spectating the Greek youth marching in blue and white uniforms and thinking to himself, I want more of that. Let's do houses next. If you look at urban Greece today, you would probably think, architectural uniformity actually doesn't sound that bad. What's so wrong about cute, picturesque white villages all across the Aegean? I hear you, but in this authoritarian context, the whitewashed Cycladic house actually ends up being a tool to exert soft power.
Except under Metaxas, where there was an attempt to regularize every aspect of Greece by this rather incompetent but authoritarian government.
That's Ioannis Stathatos, a Greek photojournalist who has done extensive research on how Greece has been photographed from the 1800s until today. We'll be hearing more from him later. Metaxas didn't invent Cycladic architecture. He didn't even invent lime washing as a response to disease. What his regime did was capitalize on an existing practice and scale it up into a kind of national aesthetic program. Clean, orderly, homogeneous. He didn't invent blue shutters either. The blue trims you see existed long before him for very practical reasons. Loulaki, a cheap blue laundry powder, was used as a cleaning agent. Mixed with lime, it gave a robust blue pigment. From sailors' houses, it spread to churches and homes. We can't fully know whether Metaxas cared more about cholera or about how Greek the islands looked, and historians are split on how conscious the aesthetic agenda really was. But the timing of the regime, the cholera measures, and the spread of white lime wash are not an accident. The 1938 health decree may have been framed around public hygiene, but it had a very visible side effect. Entire island settlements increasingly appeared uniformly white. There's also a broader architectural story here. In the early 20th century, international modernists like Le Corbusier traveled through Greece and raved about the pure volumes of white houses in the Mediterranean. Even Greek architects of the so-called generation of the 30s picked this up and started idealizing Cycladic architecture as the essence of a modern yet eternal Greekness. White cubes as both ancient and avant-garde. So Metaxas is ruling a country that's hungry for a modern identity and in dialogue with European modernism. He's on the hunt for anything that could become a unified visual symbol of Greece, and perhaps he has this perfect visual: whitewashed villages on sun-blasted rocks in the Aegean. So, by enforcing sanitization, encouraging lime washing as good order, and leaning into a visual of white and blue Greekness, his regime turns that palette into a national emblem. An emblem in the colors of the Greek flag itself. Metaxas dies in 1941, but his vision lives on. And by mid-century, the architecture of these houses has gone from cheap disinfectant and sun protection to a symbol of national identity. And it's about to get exported.
For money?
I never thought I'd live to see them.
Quite early on, tourism starts becoming very important in the Greek economy. Islands are an interesting case because up until the 50s, visitors come essentially for the ruins. From the 50s, when the whole concept of holidays starts becoming popular, that's when you start getting the beginnings of mass tourism.
Take a look at these photos. Swiss photographer Frédéric Boissonnat had a perspective on Greece unburdened by media and advertising. Through his lens, we visit a country where contemporary life and antiquity, mountains and the sea, all coexist in harmony. Antiquity is a piece of the puzzle and not the entire picture. But in the 60s, when it came time to make the big bucks, there was a clear winner who snatched the spotlight. In his work on Greek tourism imagery, John talks about the industrialization of tourism and the construction of a very particular Greek landscape. An imaginary country on which the sun always shines brightly, where the sea is always blue and placid, the houses, of a uniformly Cycladic style, are invariably freshly whitewashed, and all of whose inhabitants are permanently cheerful, welcoming, and colorful. Posters, airline ads, and travel magazines recycled the same visual grammar: white houses, blue domes, sparkling sea. And as Olympic Airways spread its wings to connect Greece to the world, this manufactured image soared alongside it. This wasn't a coincidence. As Myrtos Stenu shows in her analysis of Greek tourism campaigns, the GNTO deliberately fused two images. On the one hand, you have ancient Greece with its temples and statues. On the other hand, you have the Cyclades with their white cubes, blue sea, and blinding sun. Together, they created a clean, minimalist fantasy. Eternal antiquity meets whitewashed paradise. One could say that the 20th century tourism boom skipped over 2 millennia of Greek history in order to fuse these two images together and create an imaginary product ready to be sold. This has made Greeks see ourselves more as the spiritual successors of ancient Greeks, rather than the biological descendants of all the people that inhabited this land for the past 2,000 years.
As we start approaching the age of mass tourism, the appeal really is sun, sea, and a carefree life, particularly for North Europeans who are coming from a regimented lifestyle, probably with fairly horrible climate. The whole idea of walking barefoot on a Greek beach and drinking cheap resonated wine and staying up all night, these are wonderfully attractive. So sensibly enough, if that's what people want, that's what the tourist board is going to focus on.
In his monograph, The Invention of Landscape, Stathatos argues that a landscape is not just a place, but an idea, a constructed perception shaped by culture, politics, and economics. And that's exactly what happened with the Cycladic landscape. The image we now recognize as authentically Greek was manufactured for the tourist gaze and then fed back to locals as something to copy and preserve in order to attract more tourists. A perfect little Ouroboros. In other words, yes, the original whitewashing did come from disease prevention, but it was Metaxas that turned it into a national symbol and tourism that kept it alive for the past 60 years. Let's go back to our friend John for a second and listen to his story about the time he decided to build his very own house on the island of Kythera.
After fairly careful study, because both my architect and the engineer were very conservative, we decided that we would have something between terracotta and ochre. And the reason for that is that we found that because of the Venetian influence on the island, most of the older houses had these colorings arranged from fairly deep red through to a light ochre, never white. So we applied, and this was turned down not by the archaeology, but in fact by the municipality, because they said, well, it's got to be white like everything else. We appealed the decision, and my architect came up with a huge wall of evidence saying that if you were to pick the whitewashing on the older houses on the island, you would see the ochre underneath or the red, and they finally accepted it.
Okay, so let me get this straight. We start with a colorful aesthetic that through the years gets eclipsed by a white aesthetic. Okay, the white becomes so established that it ends up being considered the de facto color of the region. A man is denied a building permit by the municipality, which claims he's in the wrong for not keeping with the authentic style of the region, even though that's exactly what he's trying to do by painting his house yellow. So, which aesthetic is actually true to the spirit of a landscape? At this point, the word authentic has lost all meaning. Both styles are authentic and beautiful, but only one has dominated the concept of authenticity. The winner is determined by money, and the winner takes it all. So much so that politicians, architects, and heritage officials started asking, have 60 years of white made whiteness itself become a tradition we must now respect? Or should we bring back the polychromy that dominated for centuries? In December 2005, a discussion around the colors of a new development in Santorini led the Central Archaeological Committee of Greece, or KAS, to basically say, okay, maybe it's time to chill with the white buildings. Are we protecting history, or are we protecting an image that we manufactured in the 20th century? KAS's more recent decisions don't ban white, but they've started to leave more room for stone, earth tones, and historically attested colors, especially where there's strong evidence that older architecture wasn't purely white. And yet, most visitors don't see any of this. They just see the white and blue and think, ah, this is Greece. John Stathatos describes this tension perfectly. After decades of exporting a carefully edited image of itself, Greece has also started to consume that same imaginary image internally, while other countries too are compelled to manufacture parody versions of themselves for foreign consumption. Such fictions don't normally become how they see themselves. On the other hand, Greece has been exporting, but also consuming this distorted image of itself for 4 consecutive decades. And it seems like that image is becoming a part of who we are. Perhaps, after all, this is what the ultimate loss of innocence consists of. The curse whereby, when one has lived a long enough time with falsehood, it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish the truth. Today, Metaxas exists only in the history books. Cholera outbreaks are a thing of the past. KAS has embraced more polychromy. But the houses stayed. They multiplied, turned into boutique hotels and infinity pool resorts. And by the time KAS finally said, maybe not everything needs to be white, the image was too deeply engraved in the global and local imagination. Even if some architects and councils are quietly reintroducing stone and color, I don't know if we can just undo the mindset of a whole century. We accidentally crafted an image and packaged it in a pretty white box with a pretty blue bow. We sold it to you, and you loved it. You still do. You can't get enough of it. But somewhere along the line, in the midst of all the camera clicks, we caught a glimpse of our reflection in the warped glass of your lenses. In that tiny reflection, we saw a version of ourselves that felt good. A cleaner, brighter, distilled identity, reborn under that white light. We chose to squint our eyes and embrace that image, rather than open them wide and face the ugly truth in front of us. Every time I look outside my window, I can't blame us. I can't blame you either. Greece chose to be defined by the way you look at her. And that's okay. Don't stop now. An entire country's GDP depends on it. The White Houses are a perfect example of how the world only sees a tiny part of the bigger picture of Greece. On this YouTube channel, my team and I want to take you behind the curtain and show you a clearer image of Greece, the country that we grew up loving and other times hating. If you want to go on this journey with us, you can hit that subscribe button below. See you in the next video.